Welcome to our podcast, Use of Native American Mascots in Sports. I'm Ryan.
I'm Dylan.
My name is Jacob.
So to start with, we want to talk about the prevalence of the issue. So right now, it's been a big change in the past few years of how people view sport mascots, especially Native American mascots. We've had a huge swing from a lot of these mascots changing, a lot of team names changing. Um, as we move throughout the years, specifically starting right around the end of the 2010s and into the 2020s, we've seen quite a few teams change names.
Yeah, many of the logos that seem to be historic and bring lots of light onto the situation, such as the Redskins, have had people put negative connotation towards them and actually made many teams completely change their logos.
I feel like in 2020, when the Redskins changed their name, it led a lot of smaller schools, high schools to really chain along with that movement. There's a high school right next to me. It used to be called Stonewall Jackson. Now it's Unity Reed High School. It was just kind of a big domino effect for all these smaller schools.
And one of the main reasons that these are changing is they're seen as offensive towards their represented groups, or they are seen as offensive towards groups that they're not representative of. So, for instance, local high school up by me, Loudoun County High School, recently changed from the Raiders, uh, which which had connotations of the Mosby's Raiders, which was a pro-Confederate group, recently changed. That's not necessarily negative towards the Mosby's Raiders being named the Raiders. However, being a pro-Confederate group is very negative towards a lot of groups not represented by the Raiders. So you start to see the shift of perspective on how certain groups feel about mascots and team names.
Yeah, and it's like we stated earlier, but the Redskins were a huge one, and it was very controversial for a long time. And once that one fell down, they typically seemed pretty much all of them fell right into line with that.
As we were just saying,
And
in 2020, the Redskins changed their name from the Washington Redskins to the Washington Football Team. Since then, we've now changed to the Washington Commanders. And then another big one right after was the Cleveland Indians changing to the Cleveland Guardians.
Um,
yeah, with that, the Redskins and then the Guardians followed shortly right after. I feel like like it was a huge domino effect, and they wanted to get rid of all of it completely, and they didn't want any history with it too as well. A lot of them made they completely disbandished of all their logos and all memorabilia with that logo in it. For example, former Redskins players actually can't buy certain memorabilia with the team's logo on it. Like if you're buying a former player's like picture, they actually blur out the Redskins logo on the helmet, so they don't even use it at all anymore.
yeah, I've grown up around Redskins fans my whole life, and ever since that name change, they haven't wanted to buy a single thing of new memorabilia because they want to hold on to that name, the Redskins that they grew up with, and it's such a big symbolic thing to for them that oh they're a Redskins fan. It creates such a family around them, and they really don't want to lose that. And it really affects. I feel like it affects a lot of these smaller indigenous groups that you don't really see, that don't really have a voice. It's a nice reminder that this was a thing that happened, that they were here in our country well before us, knowing what to do. And it kind of creates a shines a bad light or a shadow over the Native Americans. and doesn't really get they don't get their history that they deserve.
Yeah, and especially with them completely wiping them out too, it's like they're just eliminating the logos in general. They're not even honoring what used to be too. They're just completely disbanding them and being like, yeah, these were never a part of us, and we don't associate ourselves with it too. It also makes the logos look even worse and wonder why they get a negative perception is because we kind of push a negative perception onto it.
As I was trying to say, that the Redskins having been given a negative connotation, and their iconography being given a negative connotation, um, certainly plays a role in how we perceive teams, and how teams have a role in how we perceive these groups. But it's mostly a lot of this is happening with Native American groups. As I said, the Redskins and the Indians. Um, and by giving them a negative connotation through these, like giving these icons a negative connotation, is spreading towards giving the groups behind these mascots, these icons, a negative connotation. When I say the groups behind, I don't mean the Redskins or the Commanders or the Washington football team. I'm talking about the tribes they were named after, or the tribes that they represent, or the groups they represent. So, for instance, the Redskins have a backstory with the Blackfeet tribe. Um, the Atlanta Braves have a tribe down there that they work a lot with and have a lot of history with. FSU, Florida State University, has a working relationship with the Seminoles. By giving by giving these icons a bad rep, we're also pushing them further onto the groups behind. And as I said, it's mostly being given to Native American groups. Um, you don't see this negative connotation being pushed on, say, the Minnesota Vikings. Um, if we did see that, you would see negative connotation also going against the Vikings of Northern Europe, the historical Vikings, I should say.
Yeah, yeah, especially yeah, we're basically giving a lot of these images are like I know the Redskins image has a lot of history and a lot of people have like that's a symbol in their society. So by us making it seem like as a sports logo that it's such a negative thing, we're basically saying that something in their society is negative solely because we don't see it as a, good logo for a professional football team.
I think another big issue too is how the Commanders, Redskins were forced to switch their name by all of their sponsors, basically telling Dan Snyder, their owner at the time, that they're going to remove their sponsors and take back all the money that they've given them if he doesn't change their name. So they kind of forced him to do that, and it's not just not fair to the indigenous people, the fans, even Dan Snyder. It just doesn't give them an equal opportunity as these big corporations have.
Some reasons on why it should change. I feel like many we should perceive these images to be positive image and representing the indigenous culture well, and not as in a negative light as that we're putting it into now. So I feel like if we bring back these logos or make a change for either disbanding or bringing them back, that we either make it a positive light and not a negative light and see like the history and why these teams have certain logos and they use certain people in their imagery.
Yeah, yeah, and there's certainly teams that changing the name is something that we can hopefully all agree is a positive thing. For instance, taking, as I said earlier, the Loudoun County Raiders, one of my local high schools, changed from the Loudoun County Raiders, which were named after Mosby's Raiders, which was a Confederate group during the Civil War, taking the name away from them. I think we should all be able to agree that that's a positive thing. They shouldn't have positive representation. They're a group that was not uh, upholding of our ideals. But they had done negative things. Um, Whereas by taking away the images of the Redskins, of the Indians, we're kind of lumping them in with these groups that were taking away uh, their images because of their bad actions, without these groups having made these huge, horrible accidents, or not accidents, huge, horrible actions against others.
Yeah, really going off of what Dylan just said, I mean, you can't put Native Americans in the same group as uh a group that was heavily Confederate in their day. I mean, the two have nothing to do with each other. I mean, one should really be seen as kind of an embracement of what we've lost and the history of it. And there's a lot of people that don't know it, but they do have Native American in their blood. They just don't know it's long. It's really down the family tree, but it there's nothing comparable to it to a school being named Robert E. Lee High School or Stonewall Jackson High School. It There's no correlation to the two. I don't understand how those can be taken away, but or those aren't taken away, but Native American logos and names are tarnished and thrown away.
I think if we keep them, we can use them to promote positivity in the future as well. How we react to events currently affects how the future reacts to them. Um, for instance, back in the Civil War, there was a large group that opposed the Confederates. They won, the Union won, the Confederates lost. So we've had, because of the survival of the Union's ideals, a lot of the Confederate ideals fell away. A lot of their hatred fell away. So we got rid of a lot of their ideals. We got rid of a lot of the iconography of them. Um, but we're even though there's not a war going on right now, we're doing a lot similarly by getting rid of the Redskins. Well, we should be keeping iconography of groups that we want to promote positivity towards.
Yeah, I fully agree. Yeah, we should like if you're gonna have these logos, you should have them and embrace the traditions that some of these cultures have. Because I mean, not all of us are from the same culture or any of that. So by just diminishing one culture, by just abandoning their logo, it really does a lot more to the culture than we might perceive it to. As just we're just changing a football team's name, but for them, like that was an important symbol of their society.
And as we were just saying, um, beliefs change over time. It's based on uh, the victor, whoever the victor is, writes history, uh, as we all know. Um, so that's an important thing here that we should be talking about.
Yeah, and it fits right into critical theory, and as well, the agreeing is difficult and compromise is necessary. The Redskins are actually in works trying to get their former logo back so they're able to use it in things. So while they might have agreed that the Redskins name was too much, or that they didn't want all that, they are at least going to be able to compromise and use the logo so that they can, push positive imagery towards that logo and have the correlation with that tribe that they once had.
Yeah, I mean, in 30 years, who's really gonna, I mean, most NFL fans aren't gonna remember the name Redskins. I mean, what you learn about the Native Americans in fourth grade, and that's really kind of all you think about them then. Then you grow up, never really hear about it. There's no representation out there for them. Again, like there's no football names. The Chiefs aren't named after Native Americans. We learned that. there's just a lot of things that people want to perceive or want to do in the moment, not thinking about the later actions and the communities that it can hurt or tarnish and just wash away.
Yeah, as we learned through our research, the Chiefs are actually named after a mayor of Kansas City who went by the name Chief through the Boy Scouts of America. So there is a little bit of Native American iconography through the Boy Scouts of America at that time, specifically a group called the Order of the Arrow, which took a lot of Native American customs. Now, a lot of them were skewed based on the people that were participating in the customs. Um, and since the BSA has made a change to the Order of the Arrow to remove that, um, but again, even there outside of sport, you see people removing uh, relation to Native American groups and Native American customs.
Chiefs Stadium is also named Arrowhead Stadium. I just thought about that, but it's also named Arrowhead Stadium, and what Dylan just said that they don't really put a focus on the Chiefs. You don't see a Seminole running out on the field or them donating money to a local Indian tribe and or a reservation, something out there that can really shine light and help them.
Yeah, that's something that Florida State does very well. They have their chief come out on a horse before every game. Then they actually just recently opened a Native American Studies building, and then they also work very tirelessly with the Seminole tribe of Florida to make sure that everything that they do is putting them in a positive light, and that all the Native American people of that tribe are being represented well, and that they're making sure that their culture is still heard even now, even though times have changed, that they're still being heard and have a voice in today's society.
And a lot of these teams that are getting their logos and mascots taken away aren't representing the Native American community as a whole. They're generally representing a very specific section of the Native American community. As Jacob was just saying, Florida State has their Seminoles. The Seminoles is a local. The Seminoles that they are representing is a local tribe to Florida State. They're native to Florida. They're native to that region. The Redskins. The logo was actually created by Walter Blackie Wetzel, who was in the Blackfeet tribe, and that's who was represented through the logo, which is local to the Redskins. So it it's not like we're trying to have these logos represent everyone of a single race or of a single ethnicity or something along those lines. It's a local group, um, which which changes a little bit because it lets you minimize stereotypes and lets you focus, and teams can focus more directly on the traditions of a single group.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. Like allows teams to embrace a certain tribe and or certain group of people and not have to, yeah, as you said, stereotype everybody. They're able to work closely one on one and make sure that everything that they want to be portrayed is portrayed, and that it's not everybody can agree, and it not have to be one forceful thing. It's or certain local teams are able to come up with the ideas and how they want to be honored and what they want to be portrayed and how they portray it. So I think that would be a great idea for teams to be able to do such.
And as we were saying, our overall point here is people's beliefs change over time. Now, agreeing is difficult, so compromise is necessary. Um, p by removing the history of this, we're showing that our beliefs change, that we are actively trying to, we're not actively, but our actions are working towards removing the history of the Native Americans, who back in '71 we put the new Redskins logo out. So back in '71, only just over 50 years ago now, we were promoting Native American iconography, and now we're taking that away. And that leads into our next topic, which is um, sport as a microcosm of society.
Yeah, I feel like this issue actually is great because especially now in today's society with social media and everything like that, when there's an issue, everybody's very vocal about it. So well, after they disbanded the Redskins name, they actually created a petition that has over 150,000 signatures trying to get the name back. So people are very vocal on what they wanted to, and as going back to critical theory, people's beliefs change over time. So even at the time, everybody wanted the name gone. Now, a lot of people are trying to fight for it back, and they have a platform and stuff to do it as, or do it through, should I say.
Yeah, I think it honestly, uh, for the Redskins and Cleveland Indians in specific, I think it was a huge thing of just boredom. On a lot of people, 2020, you're bored, you're in your house, you're not really thinking about anything. Some incidents happened later in that year or later into lockdown, and a lot of people are pushing for some change in the society, and they're tired of seeing like this old all this old narratives, and they want something new, and they really want something to change, and they want a difference, and so they're pushing on all of these things and everything, just trying to get all of them done, and trying to see a change that they caused, and not really thinking about the repercussions of these actions, of where it happened so fast with social media, word gets out, and then everybody's rolling with that idea, and it's a tumbleweed effect. People will just keep rolling, they keep hearing it, and the noise gets louder. And it really put a focus on the Commanders, really. Um, but with social media, I feel like this is just such a easy thing for people to really point out and talk about, as it's not, as people aren't afraid to talk about this, and it's not an issue. But
Yeah, in 2020 specifically, and leading into the later years of lockdown, specifically 2020 and 2021, and really into the early stages of 2022, we saw a huge increase in um, activism related to race relations. So th this was one of the changes we saw a huge movement with the Black Lives Matter movement, um, and these had backgrounds. The requests to change the Native American logo from the Redskins and the name of the Redskins has been around basically since the start of since the change of the logo to the original Redskins logo, the logo created by Walter Blackie Wetzel back in 1971. In 1972, there was a lawsuit to try to change it, um, but in 2020 we saw a huge shift in societal culture on racial relations. Part of that was through sports, and a lot of that was through activism elsewhere.
Yeah, and they really pushed their narrative, especially on the Redskins, as Ryan said, being in the NFL, which is the largest sports league in America. They generate a lot of money, and a lot of eyes are on that league. And so when you have something as controversial as the Redskins was, that word spreads fast and it gets out. And especially during, well, as we talked about during the lockdown, a lot of people had less things to do, had more free time, and were able to actually have more time to be able to voice their opinions and be heard. Rather, they had the time, and obviously they had platforms. Everybody, social media was going rampant. So everybody was able to voice an opinion, and eventually it led to a change.
As we talked about a little bit earlier, uh, FSU, Florida State University, works quite closely with the Seminole Tribe of Florida. Um, so one of the ways that we can, one of our strategies to both promote Native Americans in sport and um, to treat them the same uh, as many of our other groups as possible, included in sport, like the Vikings, the Minnesota Vikings, like the Boston Celtics. Um, One of our first strategies is to work with the groups that are being represented to try to promote the most positive uh, representation for them. As we said a little bit, FSU works really closely with the Seminoles. Um, if you want to add anything, Jacob or Ryan.
Yeah, I feel like yeah, especially like with Florida State, for example, they use people there to that way the tribe agrees with what they're doing, so that the tribe agrees that it's something that they would like to be put out there, and so teams are able to closely relate to allow to make sure that they're not, stepping on any controversial grounds or anything, so allow for everybody to be benefited in the if they're going to use the logos, it should be in honor and not in just to have it. It should be in honor of the people who the logo is representing.
I completely agree with that. I think it should even go further than Native American teams. I mean, there's the Boston Celtics, there's multiple that we named earlier, teams that use these names, but they don't really give credit to where these names came from. I mean, the Green Bay Packers are they were a small cheese packing company and back in the day. And nobody knows that that's what they're for. They're just the Green Bay Packers. Nobody thinks of it. But if these teams just put a small percentage of their profits for those companies or groups or activists, anything, I think it would go a long way in showing that like they care, that it's not just these big corporations, these greedy owners that have and hold all this money. It really connects people with the fans and the culture they're and that they're using their logo and like their family members in a sense.
Yeah, that fits perfectly with the next strategy is giving back to namesakes. Florida State actually just recently opened their Native American and Indigenous Studies Center at their schools so that they are able to promote the history and the tradition of the Seminole tribe, not only through their university and the football program that they use that for good light. They're also going to do it in the classroom as well, which I know some of the professional teams couldn't do, but they could also, host like, putting events with with the tribes, and so that the fans can interact with where their team name is historically came from and other examples like that.
And we have mentioned FSU quite a bit throughout this topic, but I think FSU does a really good job of treating the name with respect, through giving back, through promoting positive perceptions. FSU has done a really good job and really has shown a great framework for how teams should handle this.
Oh yeah, I completely agree. It's the teams need to. It's not just a logo or something. Every logo has a backstory, and everything has a backstory. So we should honor the backstories and make it well known.
Yeah, like what Jacob said, it really should be an honor for these teams to be able to represent these certain groups and the history that they get to wear. I think all three of us, as fans of sports teams, you really want to see the players care as much as you do. But of course, we can't be on the field or on the court. And so you really want to see like just a sense of caring as much as those fans do and relation to where it's such an honor to be a part of the organization and the team and just being able to represent yourself as one of those should be a great honor.
And even if you have a team that doesn't necessarily relate directly to a specific, for instance, with Native Americans, a specific tribe or a specific group, um, I think there are ways you can give back to the community um, that this affects without having a specific group. If for whatever reason your team does not have a direct relation, for instance, the Chiefs don't actually have a direct relation to any Native American groups, you can still include Native Americans in your traditions. For instance, a lot of colleges have marching bands at halftime. A lot of NFL football teams have halftime shows. You could have different Native American groups come in every week and perform some ceremony or some ritual during halftime um, to promote the traditions of the people you're representing.
Yeah, we definitely just need to more embrace the culture rather than just push it away, is what seems to me what we're doing now, especially banning the names and banning the logos and not letting them be used. I feel like it should be a platform to where you embrace everything that they've done in the history of pretty much the whole world, not just, hey, we're just a football team called the Redskins.
And one of the big things with team names is making sure that your name isn't offensive. Um, there is a large population that believes the Redskins name was offensive. There's a large population that don't believe it was offensive. Um, Part of the ways that we can solve this is by having voting amongst the teams, whether that's all the team head coaches have to vote for this, whether it's the organizing body have to vote for what's considered a good, a valid team name. And I think this should be applied equally across the board. It shouldn't just be denying or promoting Native American names or Native American related mascots or names, but it should be against or for all um, groups related with humans. I'm going to repeat them again. The Minnesota Vikings. There are certainly groups in Europe that have close ties to them, to the Vikings, um, and throughout the world that have close ties to the Vikings. The Boston Celtics, there's a lot of close ties there um, that we can still treat them and the Native American names, the Celtics, the Vikings, the Packers, with a level of respect. And I think part of that is by having a group vote on it.
I think
Uh,
voting's a huge thing for this topic. Whether it's between the owners or the front office, the people running the head of the team, or if it's the fans, really. I mean, those are the ones that are buying the tickets and the ones that are attending the games, the one buying the merch, wearing it. I I don't feel like actually the Utah hockey team new this year, they just relocated. They held a fan contest where they were able to vote and essentially pick the team for uh their hockey club. In 1966, the Los Angeles Kings also did it. 1947, the Bills did it. The Saints are another team, and same with the Seahawks. All of those teams were, and the Chargers were all just about the fans voting for it, giving the fans a voice to do it. Like, what do the fans want, really? And just prioritizing that as the biggest deal. I think it's a huge thing. Instead of bringing a group that isn't involved in it, doesn't have anything to do with it, and just wants it gone, having their voice heard the most. It's just very unfair.
yeah, well, we talked about how like a lot of the Redskins sponsors uh, wanted to push out the name, but I mean, if we're able to vote on a team name, and you can be like, well, hey, X amount of people are in agreement, like that's majority rules there. Like they'll be able to show that people are in support of it and it not, just louder voices being heard or people with the most money being heard. it's everybody being heard rather than, just certain people who have the most money will be the
And
ones.
and it shouldn't just be majority voice. I think a big part of it is the voice of those being represented is also heard. As we've said time and time again, the Commanders, the Redskins originally were affiliated with the Blackfeet tribe. If the Blackfeet tribe had come out and said, "Hey, please stop using the name Redskins. Please stop using this logo that represents uh, Wetzel," um, that's one thing. Yes, they're an organization. Even if everyone else said, "Hey, let's keep using it," if all the sponsors said, "Hey, let's keep using it," we should stop because it is representing them.
Yeah,
If
absolutely.
if people with Celtic heritage, if the group that the Celtics are based off of, um, all had come out or had come out unified and said, "Hey, stop using the Celtics," even if everyone else agrees that we should keep using it, all right, it's over. Um, so it's partly the majority and partly the representatives of the group.
Yeah, yeah, especially the representatives of the group. If they don't want it to be shown, it definitely shouldn't be portrayed, even no matter how many people want it. But like if for example, the Blackfeet tribe for the Redskins, if all of them wanted to keep it, but some people didn't want to keep it, but they all thought it was in positive connotation. I don't see why we should have to force it out, even with if it's represented in a positive way, and they believe that they're being represented in a positive way, and they're getting no negative connotation for it. I feel like we just kind of put it on there and not really let their voices be heard, which would be solved with this strategy.
I know we're really talking about the Commanders, Florida State, um, the Cleveland Guardians now, but the Cleveland Indians, the reason they got their name, Indians, was named after a former Native American player that they had on their team. And a bunch of their beat reporters or writers that covered the Indians were chosen to pick a name, and they all decided to name themselves the Indians in honor of the Native American. His name is Louis Sockalekis. In honor of him being on the team, and it just stuck. And then you kind of get this bad narrative that, oh well, the name Indians, it's offensive and it's cruel to the people that to the Native Americans now at this time. But back in the day, you don't see many teams that are getting named the Indians for nothing or to make fun of or anything like that. It's more of out of respect. And I think a lot of people are missing that point. And I feel like with fan voting or owner voting, um you really get just a more perspective for people that actually care about that fact to do even their own research. And then you'll actually find out that it was not derogatory at all.
Yeah, and the last solution we really have, one of our last four big solutions is an outright ban on names involving humans. By just removing Native Americans, we're sending a message that it is a problem with Native Americans. If we were to completely ban any team relating to human names or human groups, I think that changes the narrative a little bit. It's not just the Native Americans. It's hey, we're taking all the teams off that have some sort of connection.
Yeah, with them just banning the Native American logos, or they're really putting them into a negative light. While yet, for example, we've talked about the Vikings many times, how they're able to be okay, and the Vikings are also a group of humans, and but that one's okay. But when we're talking about Native Americans, we don't know if that one's will be all right. So it's just like it's making it seem like we're picking and choosing on which ones are and aren't allowed. But if we just get rid of all of them, I feel like it fixes that whole entire issue, and we don't have to worry about it at all.
Yeah, I feel like it's very unfair for us to nitpick the teams' names that we don't like or that we think that are offensive, while there's other teams out there, other logos out there that nobody really thinks about, but are just as or even more offensive than people think, and especially people in the community think. There's really no light on it. And I feel like what we talked about earlier over COVID, a lot of people just put an emphasis on these Native American teams and just kind of washing them out of the way. And it's a weird thing because we should be celebrating and embracing that part of our history and their history. But instead, we wash it away and have nobody think about it, sweep it under the carpet. It's just, it's just not fair to those tribes.
Yeah, and Native Americans aren't the only team that we see that uh teams with Native American iconography are not the only teams we see with relation to a specific racial group. Um, for instance, yes, we have the Cowboys, the Packers, um, the Giants in the NFL, but those aren't specific to a specific racial group. The Giants was referencing big people. Uh, it actually came from a quote. My fellow bigs, or it was my big fellows, my giants, is what one of the former either coaches or managers of the Giants had said. I can't remember which. So that's where Giants comes from. That doesn't relate directly to any racial group, but the Boston Celtics, those of Celtic origin, that's a specific group. The Vikings have a specific group. Um, uh, the LA Dodgers, while not directly a specific group, it's actually comes from it's the team used to be what the team was named after trolley Dodgers, which were common in the big cities such as uh, uh, New York, where they originally came from, and you see a lot of the same ethnicities within local areas in New York. So taking a group from New York, you're going to see a lot of the same ethnicity.
Um, I I have a friend up in Boston, and I asked him before this. It's like, have you ever met somebody that does find the Celtics, like possibly in the same scenario as the Redskins or Commanders at the time? And as much as you wouldn't think, the Boston fans want to embrace their teams, apparently there's a good handful of those people in that location that did not like the logo of the man with the pipe and the cane spinning the basketball. A lot of people did not like that logo at the time, which is a little surprising because you wouldn't really think that as a normal sports fan. You never really think about those thoughts. But again, that's just something that goes under the rug. Nobody really thinks about, and it's just never a focus. But there are Irish people that do find it offensive.
Yeah, I've been watching sports for a real long time, and I guess as a fan, you focus more on the, on field or on court production rather than the history. So, I actually just recently thought about the Celtics even possibly being something that could be portrayed as a bad thing, but um, like all these logos, we have to realize their backstory, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. And if it's a bad thing, we should portray or change it to so we can portray it in a good light and not have something portray like the Native American imagery as we're getting rid of it, we're portraying it as a bad thing rather than admiring it and saying that what it could possibly show into the great things that their culture has done and what they continue to do.
And just to elaborate on how much of an effect having an outright ban on names involving humans would have on sports, just in the NFL, there's 32 teams in the NFL. And just off the top of my head, 14 of them, at least 14 of them, have some name relating uh, to some human group. So, as we said, the Vikings, the Redskins, which no longer the Redskins, but they're the Commanders, which is still a group of Americans, or any not Americans, any persons can be a commander. The Raiders, the Patriots, uh, the Giants, as we said, Chiefs. The list goes on and on for the amount of teams that would be affected by this change. And we saw how much of a big of a deal it was for both the fans and for the organizations to have this change with the Redskins to the Commanders. So to have almost half the teams change their name and their mascot and their logos, how much of an effect would that have on sports?
Yeah, it would have a very large effect. I can only imagine how much money that could the NFL or pretty much all the sports leagues would have to come up with to not only get rid of all the old merchandise, but to rebrand and make all sorts of new stuff. So it would be a very drastic change in the sports landscapes for not only just the professional sports, but all sports all the way down into like high schools, middle schools, all of that.
I, and it's also a huge deal. How many high schools kind of don't copyright, but use almost like the exact same logo as these professional or college teams. And again, like even for sports teams that or high school sports that aren't making any money or revenue, like these NFL teams, it's gonna cost them so much money and just set them back entirely to have to get all these new things, jerseys, helmets. I mean, everything, the decals and on the walls at the stadium, the middle of the field. That's a lot of money that not a lot of people think about that goes into it. And again, as we talked about with the Commanders being forced out to change their name, or else their sponsors would have pulled out and said nothing that they didn't want to have anything to do with them. It's very unfair. It's unfair to the teams. It's unfair to the Native American groups or the um, Irish groups, Scandinavian groups, Vikings. There's a lot of things that just go unnoticed and people don't really talk about, as what Dylan was saying with Vikings and uh, the Cavaliers or the Raiders. Just multiple teams everywhere else that have these names, nicknames that you never really think of that just kind of go really unnoticed.
And one of the big ones, especially around here in Radford, is the Highlanders. Coming from the Scottish Highlands, um, which there's a lot of Scottish and Irish history here in Southwest Virginia, um, which is why we see not only our teams being called the Highlanders, but a lot of our buildings are named after uh, famous Scottish and Irish settlers of the area. For instance, Draper Hall, um, which is one of the dormitories here on campus, and a bunch of the other dormitories around here on Radford's campus, I should say, are named after famous families. And yes, a lot of them are also names of towns, but those towns are similarly getting the names from famous families.
Yeah, yeah, that's basically our kind of ties into the point where we've said throughout this whole thing is that we should really use these logos and especially these Native American logos that we've kind of gotten rid of, that if they potentially come back, like we talked about with the Redskins logo, that we to portray it into a positive light and embrace all the traditions that that go along with the logos and the groups of people that it's representing, and have it represent in a positive light and expose everybody to the culture of wherever your team, logo or nickname originates from, and not just have it as a just a team name, to be more of like a family atmosphere, which I feel like, as we talked about, Florida State does a great job with that. And as you mentioned, just Radford recently is doing that as well. So I feel like if all these schools or teams and professional sports leagues can kind of come together and realize that they're just more to people than just a logo or representing a sports team. They could also represent, large populations of people.
Yeah, and to wrap this all together, this has been a huge thing in the past few years. It's been a long growing issue of Native Americans in sport, Native American iconography in sport, dating back at least 50 years. But ultimately, it has blossomed over the past few years. and it has become a really big current issue um, that needs to be addressed at some level, whether that's the organizational level for the NFL, the NCAA, and and further down the line, high school like VHSL or whatnot, um, or at the organizational level, or even at the individual level. It just needs to be addressed at some level.
I completely agree. I think this is a big issue that a lot of people I think this is a issue that a lot of people make a lot bigger than what it really is. As in getting rid of Native American sports logos instead of, I feel like we should do the opposite and kind of shine more light on it and just, I don't know, give them more of something that like what the Native Americans, I would say, kind of deserve a fair shot and fair just history of what people don't really remember or don't think about.